When the Category 4 hurricane slammed into Texas with devastating fury, it wasn't just a storm, it was an unstoppable force of nature that tore through cities, communities, and homes, leaving thousands in its wake scrambling for safety. Families lost everything they held dear, clutching whatever few belongings they could as floodwaters rose and destroyed all that they knew. Emergency shelters became a beacon of hope amidst the chaos, a temporary refuge for those who had lost the world around them. Among these families was the Johnson family. Like many others, they found themselves displaced, heartbroken, and unsure of what the future held. But just when things seemed darkest, something extraordinary happened. President Trump arrived, bringing a whirlwind of hope, empathy, and most importantly, a promise of rebuilding not only homes but spirits. James and Carla Johnson had spent years building a life they were proud of. Their modest, yet cozy home on the outskirts of Houston had become a symbol of their hard work, love, and commitment to raising their two daughters, Olivia and Alicia. For James, a construction worker, that home was more than just four walls, it was a testament to his years of labor and sacrifice. Carla, a nurse at a local clinic, cherished their quiet evenings together, the warm glow of their living room lights filtering through the windows as she helped Olivia with her homework, while Alicia played with her dolls in the next room. The Johnson home was full of life. On weekends, James and the girls would take to the backyard for a game of catch or tag while Carla baked in the kitchen. The air always smelled like something sweet: caramelized apples, peach cobbler, or Carla's famous chocolate chip cookies. Their neighbors often stopped by for a chat, and Olivia and Alicia had made fast friends with the other kids on the block. But in late August, as Hurricane Harvey inched its way closer to the Gulf Coast, a cloud of anxiety hung over the once carefree neighborhood. The forecast was becoming increasingly alarming, with meteorologists warning that Harvey was strengthening by the day. First, they predicted heavy rain, then flooding. But as the storm rapidly gained strength, the warnings turned to panic as Harvey was upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane. By August 25th, just hours before the hurricane made landfall, the Johnson family found themselves glued to their television screen, watching in horror as footage of the storm's destruction began to pour in from other parts of the state. Carla sat at the edge of the couch, biting her nails in a way she hadn't since childhood. Olivia, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a well-worn rabbit named Charlie, while Alicia asked innocent questions that tore at her parents' hearts. "Daddy, is the rain going to make our house go away?" James, choking back his own fear, pulled Alicia onto his lap and kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetheart, the house will be fine. We're going to be just fine." He said the words with conviction, hoping to reassure both his daughter and himself, though deep down he wasn't sure if he believed them. The family spent that night huddled together in the living room, the windows boarded up and the house eerily silent, save for the sound of the wind picking up outside. Sleep didn't come easily. James kept his phone within reach, watching as storm warnings blared across the screen. The gusts of wind grew louder, battering the trees outside, and then, without warning, the power went out. It was the beginning of a nightmare. At 1 a.m., the full force of Hurricane Harvey descended on Houston. The Johnsons could hear the storm tearing through the neighborhood, the howling wind, the groaning of trees as they bent under the pressure, and then the unmistakable sound of water. Within minutes, the floodwaters started to seep into their home, first just a few inches, and then rapidly rising to their knees. Carla gasped as she felt the cold water soak through her clothes, and she instinctively reached for Olivia, who was now crying, clutching Charlie to her chest. "We need to leave," James said firmly, the calm authority in his voice barely masking his growing sense of dread. He hurriedly grabbed a backpack, stuffing it with essentials: some clothes, bottled water, a flashlight, and Carla's stash of medical supplies. Carla ran to the kitchen, where she kept important documents in a plastic bin: their birth certificates, insurance papers, and a few family photos. Everything else, their furniture, the girls' toys, the kitchenware, would have to be left behind. With the floodwaters now waist-high, the Johnson family made their way out of the house, wading through the murky waters toward higher ground. The storm raged around them, and it felt as though the very sky had opened up, pouring its fury down on the city. As they trudged through the flooded streets, they saw their neighbors in similar straits, families struggling to carry children and pets through the rising waters. Cars were submerged, street signs barely visible, and the once familiar neighborhood now felt like a foreign, hostile landscape. They eventually found refuge at a local church, which had opened its doors to evacuees. Inside, there was a sense of community, but also a palpable fear that no one could shake. The pews had been cleared to make room for cots, and families huddled together, sharing stories of how they had escaped the flood. For the next few days, the Johnsons waited in the shelter, anxiously listening to reports of the storm's aftermath. Roads were impassable, and the floodwaters showed no signs of receding. Every time James checked his phone for updates, the news seemed worse. The city was underwater, and it wasn't just their home, entire neighborhoods had been devastated. When the floodwaters finally began to subside, the Johnsons were among the many families transported to the NRG Center, a vast convention complex that had been converted into an emergency shelter. The center housed nearly 1,800 people, each with their own heartbreaking story of loss. Rows of cots stretched as far as the eye could see, with blankets, pillows, and a few personal items marking the small spaces that had become home for the evacuees. Olivia and Alicia struggled to adjust to their new reality. The NRG Center was loud and crowded, a far cry from the comfort and quiet of their old home. At night, the girls would toss and turn on the cots, unable to sleep amidst the constant noise of people talking, crying, and the distant hum of generators. James and Carla tried to keep a brave face for their daughters, but the strain of their situation was beginning to show. James spent his days trying to navigate the confusing bureaucracy of FEMA, hoping to secure aid to rebuild their home, while Carla volunteered at the makeshift medical center, treating minor injuries and comforting other evacuees. Despite their efforts to stay positive, the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Olivia, once a bubbly and outgoing child, had grown quiet and withdrawn. Alicia, too young to fully understand the scope of what had happened, would constantly ask when they were going home. It was a question Carla didn't know how to answer. But just when it seemed like the weight of the situation would crush them, an announcement echoed through the shelter. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump were coming to visit. The news sent ripples of excitement through the evacuees, offering a brief distraction from the overwhelming sense of loss and uncertainty that had gripped the shelter. For many in the shelter, the idea of the president's visit brought mixed emotions. Some saw it as a welcome distraction, while others questioned whether it would amount to little more than a photo opportunity. But for the Johnson family, any gesture of support, no matter how symbolic, was a glimmer of hope. On the morning of the visit, the shelter buzzed with anticipation. Volunteers hurriedly set up tables with snacks and water, while children lined up for a chance to meet the president. Despite the lingering exhaustion, there was an undeniable energy in the air. When President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump arrived, the atmosphere in the shelter shifted. Flanked by security, Trump made his way through the rows of cots, shaking hands and offering words of encouragement to the families he met. It was clear that this was more than just a ceremonial visit. The president took his time, speaking with evacuees, listening to their stories, and offering a sense of reassurance that many had desperately needed. When Trump reached the Johnson family, it was a moment they would never forget. Kneeling down to Olivia's level, the president smiled and gently touched her shoulder. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" he said, his voice warm and paternal. Olivia, who had been so quiet in the days leading up to the visit, managed a small smile and nodded. "And what about you, young lady?" Trump asked as he turned his attention to Alicia, who clung to Carla's leg, eyeing the president with a mixture of awe and shyness. With a little coaxing, Alicia let go of her mother and reached out for the president's hand. Trump lifted her up into his arms and spun her around, much to the delight of the little girl, whose giggles filled the air. For James and Carla, the moment was surreal. Whatever their political beliefs, they couldn't deny the kindness and compassion the president had shown their family. In that instant, Trump wasn't just a political figure, he was a father, a man who understood what it meant to be there for his children in times of hardship. As Trump continued his visit, Melania spent time with Carla, who shared her story of fleeing their home in the middle of the night. The First Lady listened attentively, her eyes filled with empathy as she placed a comforting hand on Carla's shoulder. After the president's visit, there was a noticeable shift in the shelter. The despair that had weighed so heavily on the evacuees seemed to lift, if only for a brief moment. For the Johnsons, it was more than just a morale boost, it was a reminder that they weren't alone in their struggle. There were people, from the highest offices in the land to the volunteers in the shelter, who cared about their plight and were committed to helping them rebuild. Over the next few weeks, as aid poured into the region and the city of Houston began the slow process of recovery, the Johnson family clung to the hope that had been reignited by the president's visit. James eventually secured financial assistance from FEMA, and while the road to rebuilding their home would be long, they knew they would get there. Carla continued to volunteer in the shelter's medical center, offering care to those who needed it most. She had always believed in the power of compassion, and now, in the wake of the storm, that belief had only strengthened. And as for Olivia and Alicia, the memories of the flood and the uncertainty that followed were beginning to fade. They spoke often of the day the president visited, recounting the way Trump had lifted Alicia in his arms and called Olivia tough. It was a story they would tell for years to come, a bright spot in an otherwise dark time. Months after Hurricane Harvey hit, the Johnson family stood on the front lawn of their newly rebuilt home. It wasn't exactly the same as the one they had lost, but it was theirs, a symbol of their resilience and the community that had rallied around them. As they walked through the front door, Olivia spotted something on the kitchen counter, a small, framed photograph of the day President Trump visited the shelter. It was a candid shot, taken by a volunteer, of the president spinning Alicia in his arms while Olivia beamed beside him. Carla smiled as she placed the photo on the mantel. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest times, there was always hope. And for the Johnson family, that hope had come in the form of a president who had taken the time to listen, to care, and to remind them that they would rebuild stronger than ever before.